Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Street Tales. I've got Johnnie Rhodes with me today. He was basically my mentor, leader, supervisor for when I started my career with the Secret Service, and I'm excited to have him. He actually completed his 25 years, I believe, with the Secret Service, so he's retired at this point, but I'm excited to get into his life story, military background, law enforcement, and his career with the Secret Service. So, Johnnie, I appreciate you being here, sir.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So we kind of talked a little bit before, but could you just kind of summarize as best you can your life story and what kind of led you into law enforcement, military, things like that?
Sure. First off, I did 21 years, 9 months in the Secret Service. 29 years total. I started after college. I went into the Navy, did 14 years in the Navy, 7 years active, 7 years reserve. Military service is just part of my family. My father, my uncles, my own son, we were always in the military. The only exception, I'm the one Navy guy in an Army family. So I don't know if that makes me the hero or the shame of the family. I haven't worked that out, but it was a great place to start, great place to grow up. How I started the Secret Service and law enforcement is a little unusual. I was duty officer on my ship when a Secret Service agent from our Norfolk office had to come there and arrest a civilian. I want to stress that, a civilian, not one of our crew members, who was working on board for fraud. And being the duty officer, I had to assist him and follow him around. And I asked that, he's a very senior agent, by the way, had a lot of time on. I asked him so many questions about the Secret Service and about their investigative mission and dual role. They finally started laughing at me and said, if you're that interested, you really need to come and fill out an application. Back then, it wasn't online. It was actually writing an application. So I knew that the Navy was drawing down post-Desert Shield, Desert Storm, so opportunities for me would be limited, especially in my specialty of amphibious warfare.
Yep.
So I thought about it and just kind of said, you know what, I think I'll do that. And it was a long process to get hired back then. From the day I applied until I actually got hired was almost 3 years, not quite, but almost 3 years. Made it and really enjoyed my time in the Secret Service. 21 years, 9 months, 6 presidential elections. Most of my time, as I told you when I was instructor, most of my time was in criminal investigations work and stayed in it for as long as I could. Then as got a little too old for law enforcement, then I went into the private sector as a bank investigator, internal affairs, and just recently decided to completely retire, at least for now, until I get bored and do something else.
Fair enough. Well, let's back up just a little bit. Where did you grow up? You said your family was military, so I'm sure you bounced around like I did.
My father was stationed at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. That's where I was born. Now, he did a couple of unaccompanied tours while we were there, so he wouldn't have to move. So I grew up there. I went to high school there, college, and was there all my life until I graduated from college, showing my age, until the 1987 when I got commissioned. And then left South Carolina and really never came back.
Never looked back.
No.
Got it. And then, so in the military, I know we kind of talked about it, and I am also a military family guy. Everybody, my family were Marines or Army, including my son and my brother. Much like you, my dad has the photos on the wall. I've told the story a few times, but it's one that sticks with me. But he's got the photos on the wall of everybody that joined in the military, and I'm on a shelf, and I'm like, I mean, Dad, I'm a cop, federal agent. He's like, yeah, what branch of the military is that? So I get it. And Marines are definitely kind of have that. Once a Marine, always a Marine. But what was your career like in the Navy?
Well, I started off, I was what they call surface warfare officer, which is ship's officer. It was an amphibious ship where we carry 300 Navy crew during wartime. We carry 500 Marines, and I was in Desert Shield, Desert Storm. So I worked with the Marines a lot. I even taught at Quantico, amphibious warfare from the Navy side. I went to a brand new ship, which ordinarily I think would be I thought, all right, a brand new ship. I was so naive. Everything's going to work perfect because they're going to give it to us brand new and everything's going to be fine and all that. Well, no, far from it. There was a lot of that first couple of years, there was a lot of issues and bugs that had to work out on that ship. So it was very challenging.
Yep.
So I looked a lot of time away from home. I mean, when you're on a ship, and obviously you and I were in the Secret Service, we spent a lot of time at home, but we could always make phone calls and things like that. But when on that ship, you're out at sea, you are gone. And my deployment, wartime deployment, I was gone 9 months. My daughter was born in April of 1990, and I didn't see her again until she was about just before her 1-year birthday. We left in August, whatever date Iraq invaded Kuwait. 3 days later, we did our emergency deployment from Little Creek, Virginia. Went down to Morehead City, picked up a bunch of angry, ready to fight Marines, and then we dashed across the ocean, dashed across the Mediterranean, no stopping until we got to Persian Gulf.
Now, for those of us who've never been on a Navy ship, it's kind of like its own city, is it not?
Very much self-contained platform. Like I said, with 300 Navy, 500 Marines on board, that's a crowded vessel. Not a lot of room. It's not like a luxury cruise, not like a cruise liner. No. My room, and as an officer, I had it better than most. I shared with the roommate, and it was about the size of a bathroom.
Oh, yeah. I have one experience. I was on a merchant marine ship, which, again, not Navy or anything. This was when the hurricane hit Puerto Rico, and we were there for 4 or 5 days. I was super excited, and then I got there, and I realized those ships are not built for men that are 6'4", 6'5". A bunch of us ended up having to sleep in the bathroom because we couldn't fit in the little bunks.
Now, our living conditions actually, compared to most amphibs at the time, were pretty good because that's one thing I'll say about a brand new ship. The bunks, the size, they really paid a lot of attention to it compared to some of the older. I mean, it's an old ship now because it was commissioned in 1989, but as ships go, comparing it to other amphibs, we really were designed for some comfort. Not like cruise liner, but compared to other military ships, other amphibs, living conditions on board, like say air conditioning, heat, food, water, everything like that. Everybody had a decent sized bunk, living conditions. It's pretty good.
Now, was that the only place you traveled when you were in the military? Was over the Middle East, I guess, or did you get to go experience anything else?
Well, I started, once I got commissioned, I left South Carolina. Just myself, my wife just got married right after commissioning. We went to Newport, Rhode Island. That's Newport Naval Education Training Center. And that's where I went to school, basic surface warfare officer school. Went there, and then I was assigned to Little Creek Amphibious Base. There's only 2 amphibious bases in the Navy, at least back then. I'm not sure about now. It was either San Diego or Coronado, or Little Creek in Norfolk. Now, I also spent a lot of time in New Orleans because that's where my ship was being built.
Got it.
There at the time. And in terms of deployment, no, I just made that one deployment to the Middle East and back.
Okay. Because prior to this, I bring it up only because prior to the Secret Service, I'd never traveled outside the U.S. And then all of a sudden I got exposed all over the world. But we'll get into that in a minute. But I do have you said you taught at Quantico. And just for people who don't know, that's also where the FBI and the DEA also train. I didn't even realize that military trained there as well. Could you talk about that a little bit? Not necessarily anything, secret, but just kind of what that experience was like.
Well, just like Newport, Rhode Island is a big officer training base. Quantico is a big Marine training. I mean, they go there for their basic school. They go there for their captain's career course, which is amphibious warfare school. So there's a lot of officer training schools that are in Quantico. Also, the Marine Corps OCS is there. So Marines are constantly going in and out of Quantico for training. And I'm not that far as a Little Creek, so a few of us officers went up there as instructors, teaching them amphibious warfare school, also teaching a little bit at their OCS. Just from the Navy point of view, this is what you can expect when you work with us on an operation.
Got it. Okay. And how long were you there?
When I would go there, I was there several times. I'd usually go there for a week or two, just TDY.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So it's like a TDY appointment.
Right.
Perfect. Okay. So then you go from the military and you went straight into Secret Service?
No, I did. While I was waiting for it, I went into private sector manufacturing management for about a year and a half, 2 years. Didn't hate it so much, but didn't love it either. I knew that it wasn't for me. So I said,
I know.
The minute I got a job offer from the Secret Service, immediately leaped on it. It was time for me to go. And not much a choice of duty stations back then either. They said, if you want this job, you're going to Miami.
Okay, fair enough.
And I'm glad I did. I really enjoyed. That's a great place to start. Miami is really busy. I loved it down there. I felt like I was living. I'm showing my age now. I felt like I was living the life of Miami Vice in a lot of ways. It was a lot of stuff going on down there, a lot of action, and a great place to learn the job. Law enforcement, Secret Service down in Miami.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we kind of talked about it a little bit, but again, just the way things change. You were with the Secret Service pre-cell phone, email, that kind of stuff. And I'll give a little backstory on my side, and I'll let you talk about it because it still shocks me that we were able to do things that way. But when I was in the Secret Service, obviously cell phones, email, you would get emails saying, hey, you're going here, we need your assignment here. So it was pretty instantaneous. And then they would always call you on your cell phone or text you, whatever it is. So you knew you got a pretty good head start on what your next assignment or mission was going to be, or what trips you were on, what trips you were taking. But you were around pre that. Could you explain how that all worked out?
Sure. We did have email, but that's not how we got notified of assignments. We had, and there were some cell phones, but not many. Like the duty agent would always have a cell phone. The duty counterfeit squad agent would have a cell phone. The supervisor of the protection squad. And by cell phones, these things were the size of our military walkie-talkies, nothing like smartphones, old-fashioned cell phones. And how you would get an assignment, say it's a 24-hour duty desk. So whoever the duty agent is, he would monitor a teletype machine, and trips would come out, and people would list. You'd call I would have their home phone number. I try to call them at home. Can't get a hold of them at home. I would, depending if it was during a work day, I'd raise them on the radio, because the radio was a big part of communications. We'd actually, like you talk on the phone, we would talk on the radio between cars with different parts of the city. We would have conversations on our car radios. And I'd raise them on the radio, or I'd call them text them send them a page and say, hey, call the duty desk. And they'd call the duty desk, and I'd brief them on the assignment.
And then they'd have to come in and get their tickets. And
that's right.
How did that travel work?
Yeah, you have to come into the office, get your tickets, leave your keys to your government car in the office, and take a cab from the Miami office to the airport.
And how long were you in Miami?
Back then, they were moving us out pretty quickly for protection, but I was there I started March of 96, and by June of 2000, I did my first tour in Washington, D.C. Protection, 6 years of protection, which was almost, but not quite 3 years in the intelligence division, which, to explain to people who don't understand, that was threat investigations. That's our intelligence division in Washington. It's investigations, but not criminal investigations, so it's considered protection. It's investigating people who make threats against our protectees. Then I did 3 years, 5 months on the vice president's detail. Now, before that, while I was still in Miami, back then we would do temps on details. If you were thinking about the vice president's detail, you would get, like in my case, I would go up there for 30-day temps. This is showing my age again. This is when Al Gore was the vice president. So I would go up there, do a 30-day temp. And that was a way for you to look at it, saying whether you want to do this or not. It was also a way for the detail to look at you and see if they want you. So.
Yeah. And I think that's a great idea. I think they've gotten away from that.
They certainly have.
Yeah. You pretty much just get told where you're going to go, and that's where you're going to be.
Right.
And so I've talked a little bit about it, but there's 3 phases in the Secret Service. Phase 1, you go to a field office, you do criminal work, you do post standing, you do advanced like assist. So if the protectee comes to your city, you'll work with the detail who's doing the actual advance, but you'll help them, with meetings and hooking up with local law, whatever assets they need. But could you talk about it from your point of view, just because it was a little bit before my time?
Sure. Very much. Miami was a big office, so they were constantly drawing on us for manpower. So you have your phase 1, but you're also on rotation. A rotation lasts for 30 days. Your life is not your own. You can't really take leave. You can't plan a time off. During that 30 days, have your bags packed, because you're subject to travel at any time. And actually back then it was a little different. All rookie agents started in what we call check squad, when the Secret Service investigated treasury check fraud, treasury check forgery. And it's understood, brand new agent, Johnnie Rhodes, your rota starts January 1st and ends December 31st.
Yep.
your first year, you were always on the duty rotation, meaning if somebody, Tyler Martin, is on the counterfeit squad and he has an arrest, he has to appear in court, but he has a trip starting Sunday, you're going to go for him. And we really didn't do like that we do now, where they have to send a message to headquarters saying somebody's replaced them. I would be sitting at the post standard briefing, and they'd call Tyler Martin's name out, and I'd stand up, Johnnie Rhodes from Miami replacing Tyler Martin for this trip. I mean, that was just routine. Nobody cared as long as there was a body replacing you. That was it. We also had a lot of protection in town. Being in Miami, we have a lot of people from every weekend. There was somebody from South America, the Caribbean. Somebody was always in town. So we were always doing protection. And being a major field office, for visits in town, the SAC, the special agent in charge, he would take a lot of pride in staffing that office, staffing that visit just within Miami. There's a big deal if you were a major field office. And back then in Miami, we had about, I'd say, close to 80 something people at our height. So there was a considerable pride and also pressure on, hey, do it all in-house. Of course, I worked a lot of weekends, but as you and I talked, coming from the military where I worked all kinds of hours and got no extra money, I was very happy. It's like, wait a minute, you're going to work me this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, but I'm going to get paid extra. And if I work at night, I get night differential. And I'm single income with 2 kids, so I was standing on my supervisor's desk, stopping my foot. Yeah, I want to work this weekend as long as you're going to pay me. I was a mercenary. So yeah, I need the money. I will definitely work.
Yeah. So I remember when I started there, in training, they would always say, you'll probably be a year or two before you start taking any foreign trips. I think I was a month out and I started already taking trips I worked the United Nations, and then I was in Japan and I was in Asia and I was traveling all over. And I'm like, man, this is great. Come to find out, anytime, what we would later call like fun trips to Europe or Rome or, those types of trips, shorter trips, the phase 3 guys would be all over that. I'm like, oh, I see what's happening. You guys don't want to go sit in a car plane for 18 hours. you want the easier, shorter trips.
That's true.
That's a sell.
That brings up a good point. I came on as a GS9, which was unusual because I had a master's degree. Usually people would come on as a 5 or a 7. And there was a policy when I got hired that to work a shift as on a foreign dignitary, a foreign head of state coming in, they get Secret Service protected, work the shift, or to go on a car plane trip, you had to be a GS9 or above. Because the reason you're a GS5, then you're a GS7, then you're GS9. So a GS9 usually had some time on. I didn't, but they just saw I had a GS9. And so I went on foreign trips very quickly too. But to your point, I was excited to go to China, but I realized that was one of my earlier foreign trips. I realized, some of these older guys, and I was the same way when I was a phase 3 agent. Like, no, I'm not excited about a 24 or 23 hour car plane trip on a C5 or a C17. Let these young men and young women do it. But I had a lot of fun. One of my first trips, Great Wall, went to see the Great Wall. So
yep,
it was interesting.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about it as well, but you were talking about the different levels once you were on the detail. Sorry, transitioning onto the detail side, where you start off as you work the detail, you work like the kids or whatever, but then I don't want to call it a promotion, but the more time you have on, you work your way up to doing like advances. And once you're an advanced lead agent, you're pretty much gone all the time, and you are responsible for trips overseas, well, anywhere. But I never made that level. I didn't do lead advances. I did a lot of trips, but I was always side agent, RON, whatever, counter surveillance. I never did lead agent. Could you talk a little bit about that and what the expectations were?
Well, you start off, you're a shift agent, and you're working the shift, and you're the junior person on the shift, and kind of just watching what's going on and learning the ropes, learning everything. This was when I was on the vice president's detail. When I was on, not temporary, but when I was on as a permanent duty station after I left our intelligence division, Cheney was in office. So I went over there late 2002 when I went there. Then after you've been on the shift, could be about a year, then you go to what's called satellite detail. Satellite would be like on either TS, where you're driving the limo, transportation, counter surveillance, or in my case, I went to the family section, which With family section, I was assigned first to the vice president's spouse. In this case, it's Mrs. Cheney. I was assigned to her detail and did that for a while, forgot how long, and then I got assigned to the daughters and the grandchildren. And that was interesting. When we were assigned to the grandkids, as you and I talked, we very much dressed down. These are very young children, so we were not wearing suits. This was blue jeans, sneakers. We dressed very, very casual. One of my memories now that I smile, I laugh at, and definitely something they won't make movies on, is I was with the youngest grandchild one Halloween, and I took her trick-or-treating. I thought, that's your tax dollars at work.
Yeah, there you go.
My shift partners and I were laughing about this, saying, hey, this is definitely not going to make the movies, like a Jason Bourne movie or something like that, but this is what we're doing. I had the youngest grandkid, and she was so scared going trick-or-treating. She held on to my hand real tight, and when we go to the door, she would hide behind my legs and peek around and say, trick or treat.
Well, you also told a story where you were at so many soccer practices and school stuff. They started to think that you were the dad.
Right. With the oldest grandchild, I was to so many soccer games and so many practices. One of the coaches came up and thought I was her father. She thought that was very funny. And I said, no. I said, you know who her granddad is, right? So you can kind of guess why I'm here. And he looked at me, well, you're not looking the part, yours your suit and your dark glasses. And said, no, we're not that. And he goes, you're just by yourself. I said, no, I'm not. You see that person over there pretending to read a book? You see that person over there walking a dog? What kind of dog does that dog look a little bit like a police dog? And see that person over there sitting in the car? So we're around. We're just not trying to make ourselves too noticeable.
Yeah, fair enough. And I'm sorry, we're going to bounce around a little bit, but I'd be remiss before we move too far on. But you had a great story with the DEA and the parrot.
Oh, yeah. That was back in the Miami days. We worked with law enforcement, not just local law enforcement, but I'm sure you did too in the secret, but also other federal agencies. Everything in Miami, including one of our core investigations was counterfeit currency. Everything down there is associated with drugs. You'd have somebody bringing heroin in. They'd also bring in counterfeit currency from South America. We would do a search warrant for counterfeit, and we'd find drugs. We'd call the DEA. DEA's doing their search warrant, so their arrest. They find counterfeit currency. They call us. Their one operation wasn't my case. I don't know all the details of it, but I went out to help with the DEA's crime scene, and they had counterfeit currency, and they arrested some people that were from South America, and we arrested everybody in this home, took them out, and they had a pet parrot. And policy, DA policy, and also local law enforcement policy that when you take everybody out of the house, there's any pet live animal, you can't leave it there, whether it's a dog, cat, or something. You have to call animal control or something. Now, I'm not sure what they did with this bird at first, but it made its way to some pet store. And I was talking to the DEA agent one time on another case, and I saw the parrot in the office. I said, what happened? I thought this thing went to a pet store. And he said, well, we did. And then we got a phone call from the pet store owner who was very angry. He said, you have an hour to come here and get this bird, or we're going to kill it. What happened? What happened? Well, he was kind of reluctant to tell me. He's kind of embarrassed, but he said, Mom and her kids were looking at this parrot thinking about taking it. And remember, there's a talking parrot raised by criminals.
Yep.
So its language and its choice of words was not so nice. So it would cuss at you in Spanish. So it's one of its more polite phrases that it squawked in front of Mom and the kids was the Spanish version of "bitch, get me a cracker." And that's one of the nicer phrases of thing. And sure enough, while he was telling me the story, and this bird is in the office, it squawked something. And people that spoke Spanish, which I do not, paused and laughed and said, "What did that bird just squawk?" So they didn't know what to do with it. So we also in our task forces, we work with all kinds of law enforcement and also emergency services. So one South Florida emergency service agreed to take this bird into their home and into their firehouse. So found its way to a firehouse. These are firefighters. Like, hey, a bird will swear at us in Spanish. Bring it over. We'll have that bird swearing in all kinds of languages.
We'll have a good time.
Yeah.
So good. And then also, I don't want to get too far on, but at what point, because we had mentioned you were assigned to Scotland Yard in London, was that phase 3 or where was that transition?
One.
That was phase 1. Okay.
Senior phase 1 agent in 1999. We were doing this temp helping New Scotland Yard, City of London Police, a financial crimes task force. Back then in the 90s, if your credit card was stolen, say at Disney World, and you knew about it within 5 minutes and reported stolen, that credit card could still be mailed to Europe. And even after you reported stolen, was still usable by criminals for up to 2 weeks. So it was a big business going on. So I got a chance. It was volunteer, but I was glad to do it. And it's one of the most rewarding things I ever did in law enforcement. Just, American law enforcement, you're assigned to a foreign police department, and you get to watch things and assist them, not just watch, but you also get to observe them and see what's going on and see what laws, how they do things, and how they do things different from over here. Some ways their job is harder, some ways their job is easier. Like one way their job is easier, most of your audience will probably know what a controlled delivery is, correct?
Yes.
Okay. They would do a controlled delivery. These stolen American credit cards were intercepted. They would have one of their officers disguise themselves undercover as a Royal Mail carrier, deliver the stolen credit cards to an address. And in American law, once we did a controlled delivery, we had to get a search warrant, right?
Yep.
They don't mess with the search warrant. Constitution, Bill of Rights doesn't exist over there. There is no Fourth Amendment.
Yep.
You sign for stolen merchandise, credit cards. In this case, the police descend and they search the place and toss it. And that's what I personally observed. I'm like, no search warrants. And they laughed at me. No, we got this. And we searched the place. Okay. Fair enough. Then my part was, since they were American credit cards, I was the point of contact to run these credit card numbers to see if they were in fact stolen and who were the victims and assist them in that matter. So it was an interesting chain event. They have their version of Miranda, a little different from ours. They can question suspects at the crime scene without an attorney, but once they get them, and this is back in the 90s, so it hasn't really caught up to this in the United States yet, but once they get them to the police station, every interview had to be video recorded, and there was no such thing as waiver of counsel over there. Didn't happen. Even if they brought in their own counsel, there was a court-appointed solicitor. They have two types of lawyers over there. And stop me if I'm going into too much detail. You have a solicitor, which is like just a basic lawyer that can help during questioning. But if you go to court, it has to be a barrister. But there's going to be a court-appointed solicitor sitting next to this guy or girl and giving them advice. And there's no such thing as waiver of counsel there during that type of questioning. I thought that was very interesting. And none of the people I worked with over there in fraud were armed. Only one of them was even trained in guns, and that's because he came from robbery homicide. But everybody else, including myself, the whole time I was there, I was unarmed.
Yeah, and we did talk about that because I did do advance in London on the Harris detail, so I worked with a lot of the local police officers. And it's still to this day, I think, because I was out at the airport in Essex, and I think there was like 40 or 50, again, I don't phraseology, but they were Essex or London-based, United Kingdom-based law enforcement because they had people who would transport. There's a bunch of cops, but only one sergeant, they called him the rifle sergeant for us, for our American terms. And they're like, he's the only one that if they need to get weapons drawn or whatever, he had them in his SUV and a steel lockbox. There was a bunch of signs. I mean, it was not something like, oh, hey, there's a guy with a gun, pull out your guns and shoot him. It wasn't like that. There was like a chain of command. So that's still very prevalent to this day.
Good.
They don't walk around with guns.
Right. When I worked protection over there, and I did a few times, now they're special branch. They were armed. They were armed with round chamber and all that. But when I was there in an investigative capacity, it was like you said, what you and I consider armed is not what they different over there. An armed response, they, like two officers in a car, they had their guns unloaded in a lockbox, and there had to be a call. We need an armed officer at this address. And they would actually go on the radio. This is Martin in car number whatever. We're going in. You'd have to call in on the radio, going into pistol box number so-and-so at this time. Drawing pistol number 1, drawing pistol number 2, and loading the pistols. And I saw this, and what even more astonished me, what they considered a loaded weapon or what you and I considered a loaded weapon is different back then.
Mm-hmm.
They don't chamber the first round. I questioned. I said, why not? That's still not, that gun's still not ready to go. And that's the policy over here at that time was they want the officer to make that extra step to chamber a round and be even more hesitant to shoot. Okay, that's your laws. That's fine. I was just curious.
Yep. I think that's still the way they do it to this day. Again, we never had to, at least on my aspect of the detail, we didn't deal with anybody that was armed, but that was my understanding talking with their law enforcement. But you did also get to testify, which I think is not normal, or at least I think you're the first person I've ever talked to that actually got to testify in a foreign court. And could you explain how that's different than in the U.S.?
Right. Being a Secret Service agent over in the UK, I'm under diplomatic immunity. So they asked me to testify in a counterfeit case because they had some counterfeit American money. So obviously there's an issue with their officers testifying in a case about counterfeit American currency. And so it was a big deal. They had to go all the way to the American embassy. The ambassador had to get involved. They had to go get permission from Washington. And there had to be a temporary waiver of my diplomatic immunity and also strict condition. I would testify as an expert witness on genuine currency. Remember, we were in training. Hey, we're not experts on counterfeit.
Correct.
Testimony had to be limited to my expertise in genuine U.S. currency, and I would not respond to any questions if I was challenged on my expertise. That had to be, hey, he is an expert. Opposing counsel, you don't get to dispute that. That's the way it is. And so I got to testify, and very interesting. And the courts over there, very much like they were way back when. They still wear the wigs. It was much more an accusatory system. I thought it was intimidating, and I'm just a witness.
Yeah.
That bench is sitting very high, and that judge with the wigs and the barristers with the wigs. It was an eye-opening experience. It was fun. Like I said, very few of us have done that. I think when I was there, one guy from the embassy had also testified. And so probably, at least back then, I was only maybe one of about 5 or 6 of us that ever testified in those conditions in a foreign court.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was slated to go to do a temp assignment at The Hague right when COVID hit. So my first attempt, they shut it down. And then my second attempt before going to the detail, shut it down. So I never got to experience it. I was very much looking forward to it. But again, it's one of those opportunities that I unfortunately missed.
Mm.
But so you mentioned that you worked through 6 campaigns. Could you talk a little bit about that? What it was like,
Sure.
Not on the detail, because things have changed, in my opinion, rapidly, because pretty much modern day campaigns, as an agent, you're just on the road. I mean, 3-4 weeks at a time. You'll come back for a few days and you're right back out again. But did you see any changes? And do you recall any moments in those campaigns?
Sure. First campaign is right when I got hired, 96. Clinton Gore administration, and running up against Bob Dole.
Mm-hmm.
We were gone a lot. No question about it. We were definitely out 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And we had what we called back then days off on the road. Like if you had a day off between assignments, sometimes 2 days off, they would actually leave you out in the field, which I didn't mind too much because sometimes that's really not a trip home where you fly home. By the time you get home, it's midnight. You've got maybe 7 or 8 hours at home or 10 hours at home, and you got to leave at 4 o'clock the next morning. That's not. I'd rather, hey, fly me into Tampa, which is my next assignment. Get me there like a day and a half early, so I'll do some laundry or I'll go to the gym or go relax. I also remember, and you and I talked, the 96 campaign compared to campaign now, there just wasn't the violent rhetoric that there is now. I mean, who wanted to kill Senator Dole? Nobody. I mean, the political differences just weren't as heated back then. And consequently, candidate protection was nowhere near what it is now. Magnetometer support wasn't a given. Magnetometer support wasn't even a given forget a candidate, for the vice president. When I would do, again, temps with the vice president Gore, post standing for the vice president. It wasn't necessarily like it is today, standard procedure to get magnetometer, counter sniper, special operations support. Didn't happen. Not unless there was a justifiable need. We had some intelligence, and certainly candidates didn't get it. Again, because we just didn't have that negative information out there and political violence on social media. Because obviously this is 96, social media still not out there. And it just wasn't the violent rhetoric that we see today.
Yeah, no, and you even said that armored cars weren't necessarily always used for all the trips either, which to me is surprising because I think they're pretty much used for almost anybody and everybody.
Yeah, the vice president had definitely had an armored limo. The candidates, not until a certain point, not necessarily, and the spouses did not have armored vehicles at that time. No. Yeah, it's very uncommon for them to get them.
Yeah, it's definitely changed. What about the travel? Do you think you've seen an uptick in the travel? Again, I know you retired, what was it, 7 years ago?
2017.
2017, sorry. So just from the time you started till the time you left, because I've heard a lot of more senior agents and bosses and stuff who are around longer than I was. The travel is just, it's, in their words, it's like 10x from what they remember. Now that some of that could just be they, deleted it from their mind. But what was your experience with that?
I remember traveling a lot in '96, and I remember going for 3 weeks at a time. I do remember that. That was now 2000. I didn't travel hardly at all in 2000 because I was I had just gotten to our intelligence division, and I was on the duty desk because that was the first assignment in intelligence division. I was on the duty, so I didn't travel that much in the 2000. Now 2004, I was on the vice president detail, and yes, I did travel a lot. I think that the entire month of October, I was in Ohio. Ohio was a battleground state. The vice president was going there so often that they said, hey, you know what? We're just not going to fly in the advance team in and out. Just check in there at your hotel. And I actually thought it was a good idea. Just check in. You're there for the month. And you might have a day or 2 days between advance assignments, because that's what I did most of the time. I was a site advance agent. So I remember traveling a lot, 2000, like that. Now, after 2004, like 2008, 2012, I was a phase 3 agent in Atlanta. After I left the detail, I went now as a senior agent and a front quasi supervisor role as a group leader. Even during a campaign, I didn't have to travel as much, and I had a little more say so on our trips. Plus, we had more agents. I believe now part of the reason in this last campaign, all that traveling so much, not only the violent rhetoric and just the hostile feelings, but we're shorthanded. And obviously the people who, if we're shorthanded, then the people that are left, obviously you're going to have to travel more.
Yeah. Well, and I think we kind of touched on that too, because you see it in the news and stuff like that. But even when I was on the detail, the Secret Service has had so many protectees, and I think they still do. But you didn't see a commensurate uptick in agents and uniform division and field offices, things like that. The expansion of who gets Secret Service protection has
definitely we have more people getting protection. Obviously, it wasn't common for, say, the vice president, if they had adult kids in college or somewhere else, it wasn't standard for them to get protection for several reasons. One, a lot of them didn't want it. And that becomes an issue for us because if they're adult living away from, say, the White House or the vice president's residence, they don't have to take our protection if they don't want it. If they say, thank you, understand you have a job to do. If I need you, I'll call you, but I don't want you here.
Yep.
We got to walk away.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And again, I don't know what changes are coming down the pipeline, but these are all just kind of things that have the change. I mean, again, kind of going back and forth a little bit, there were agents that when I was on the VP detail that were coming to the detail that never did a United Nations. They didn't really travel because we called them COVID agents. They were pretty much just locked down to their field office. So they did do some site work, but they weren't used to the travel. And when they hit the detail post-COVID, they were like, holy crap, what is going on? Like they're not home. Their whole lifestyle changed. And it's like, yeah, this is what it was like pre-COVID, and this is kind of like where it's going. So they didn't have that exposure.
Right. And I was retired by the time COVID hit. I was an already civilian, so I didn't see that part of the Secret Service. But I could see that COVID, nobody's traveling, and you're used to working from home maybe, or you're used to not traveling, and then it's a rude awakening when you get back to normal. When I worked in our intelligence division, after I was off the duty desk, I traveled all the time because I'm not assigned to the detail, but intelligence division, we support the president whenever he travels someplace. I was constantly, this is during the Bush of the years, I was constantly at the ranch. Yeah. I even spent Christmas there.
Oh, yeah.
And New Year's. So to me, I never experienced the COVID years. So to me, the travel was always there. The only time that I didn't really travel that much was my years in Atlanta as a senior phase 3 agent. That's when you're back on the field. And during the non-campaign years, I took a trip if I wanted it, or if somebody in my squad was sick or hurt, or somebody in their family, or they needed to testify in court, the U.S. attorney needed them for trial, then I would step in and take trips. Now, and also during the campaign, I traveled, but I also saw that we had more people, and more people means a little more time for people in between trips, which we don't have right now. We're such a manpower crisis.
Well, and that kind of segues in, and like I said, we'll bounce back and forth a little bit. But you said that I can't remember if you had been a supervisor yet, or just when you were on the detail, you would walk around the White House and you would talk to uniform division guys and talk about broken promises.
Right.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I was a GS-14 after I got promoted, and I was at the academy. I was actually instructor at the academy, but uniform division was so short that agents were supplementing them.
Yep.
At White House. And I made it a point, just also being a 14, being a senior agent, I would try to talk to some of these younger uniform, because I was concerned, why are they leaving? And I would talk to them unofficially, said, I'm not going to say any names. Tell me about, can I politely inquire, what is your ambitions? What do you want to do? And if you are leaving, what could somebody like me do? Not mentioning your name. What could somebody like me do to make this place better and more enticing? And one common denominator, and I told this to my supervisor, and I had a conversation with my SAC. I said, this is what I'm seeing going out there and talking to the front lines, actually going out there talking to young uniform division officers. And for those of you that probably don't understand, there's two parts of the Secret Service. There's actually more parts, but there's special agents and there's uniform division. The uniform division is strictly protection, and they're assigned to the White House, the vice president's residence, and missions and all that. But one of the things I got, a common denominator, was I remember this one guy was saying, hey, I said I wanted to go to K9. I was always interested in that because the uniform division, that's where our K9 handlers come from. And I was told by my boss, if I do these things, volunteer for this, work days off, minimize sick time, et cetera, and do a good job and have this and do these accomplishments, I'll be a shoo-in for this. By this date, I'll get you into K9. And that didn't happen. And somebody junior to him, less time on, got a K9 slot. And he was very upset. I said, that is not how I want to start my law enforcement career and commit to an organization that's already shown me they're going to be distrustworthy and lie to me. He said, I'm not going to stand for that. And I said, fair enough. And they stressed that it's one thing to tell me I can't have it, and you don't know when you can give it to me, but don't promise me something by a certain date, and then, tough luck, you didn't get it.
Yeah. Well, and that so just trying to follow your career. So you were phase 3 in Atlanta, and then you got promoted. Did you get promoted in Atlanta and then go to DC, or what did that look like?
No, that's very difficult to do in the field office. Atlanta is a sought after position. Very rarely did they promote when I was in, did they promote a 13 to a 14 in Atlanta, because there was too many existing 14s that wanted to come down there. Yeah. So when you make a decision as a phase 3 agent, go back out to the field, if you want the grade, if you're hungry for the grade, your best bet is to stay in Washington, or realize that if you want a grade, a promotion, you might have to go back to Washington. And in my case, I did. Now, I would have stayed in Atlanta. I was happy there, but in my personal circumstances, my kids have graduated from college. They had moved out of state. So my wife and I were just talking about it and said, you know what? There's really no ties to us here. Why not reignite my career and try to promote? Because pretty much the whole time I was in Atlanta, and I was in Atlanta from Memorial Day weekend 2006 to Halloween 2014, I didn't participate in the promotion system because you don't have to if you don't want it. You can sign a waiver saying, I don't want to be evaluated as a supervisor and I'm not putting in for promotion.
Yep.
So I took a break and I said, sometimes I question myself, man, what the heck did I do? It might have been a mistake, but I said, you know what, I'll try. Put in for promotion, and I got accepted for promotion at the academy. That was the only 14 assignment. That was my last assignment before I retired because I went up there with quite some time on.
Well, could you talk a little bit about what you saw while you were at the training academy? Because again, I have my perspective, which I was there as a trainee, and then I would go back for, PDT, which is you have to go basically back a refresher course on presidential division protection. And so that's what I saw. But you were a supervisor there. So like, one
of the first things I saw.
Yep.
And remember, you went to FLETC just like I did, right? You went to FLETC before you went to federal law. One of the first things I noticed, and I started in 96, and I looked at our training academy, and the physical grounds hadn't changed that much. Mm-hmm. As opposed to FLETC, Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, I could tell a lot of money had been put into that place. The tactical village, the rifle range, pistol range, a lot of time, a lot of money, and the place had grown. And I was a little disappointed that our own academy had not grown. Certainly we were shorthanded, but I also had great instructors. I was very pleased with that, very knowledgeable instructors. I had the investigative section, criminal investigations, and then I also had threat investigations. A lot of times it was challenging because we go into protection when they're shorthanded of agents, they will steal my instructors. So that made training very, very difficult and challenging sometimes. Short of instructors, I need instructors to teach. So I saw that made it very difficult. I thought the weapons training was still top notch. I don't know what your perspective is from a student, but from what I saw as a student and also as a supervisor, I was glad to see that the Secret Service had not budged on that. The marksmanship standards, the firearms instructors still were taking that very, very seriously. So I was very happy about that.
Yeah. What about and yes, actually, I would agree with you. We talked briefly about it. We don't need to get into it, but the Secret Service has been in the news and the limelight because there's been a lot of incidents involving agents in shootings. I mean, not just the Butler PA one, but there's been some other ones that to me, it doesn't connect with the type of training that I remember receiving. And when I was on the detail, they were going to a monthly qual. Like you had to go every month you had to go re-qualify with your pistol, and then every 3 months with your rifle, things like that. But so for me in the actual trainings village, RTC, the firearms training was top notch in my opinion. And it was my fourth academy. So
you would know better than me.
So I've had some comparisons for it, but did you see any change in the type of individuals we were recruiting? Because I know it's common. Everyone thinks that everyone comes to the Secret Service, they're either former military law enforcement. My experience, that's not true. And I didn't start my career with Secret Service till 2016, but did you see a shift or a change in that way?
I think that got worse after I left. Now, did I start to see some differences and less experienced people being recruited into the Secret Service? Correct, but not to the way it is now, I don't think. I left before that happened. Because, like you, for instance, you were in my class. I was a class coordinator. You had experience, and also people in our class. There was a lot of ex-military and ex-law enforcement. So I think that happened more after I left.
Yeah, and I've talked about this on previous episodes. And just so you know, I don't necessarily believe that you need to be military law enforcement to be a good agent, but I do believe you should have some sort of life experience and the ability to talk to people, because as a Secret Service agent, you're talking to.
Agree more. I could not agree
Yeah.
more. One of my best trainees when I was a Secret Service instructor, and I made a point, says, wow, guess what the job she had before she came to us?
What was that?
Emergency room nurse.
Oh, but see, I think that's great.
And I could, especially when it came into communications like interview and interrogation and also talking to staff. And I said, you really knocked this out of the park. You're forthright, you're blunt, but you're not overly aggressive. And she said, have you ever had to talk to people and tell them that their son died or their wife died, or have a hard conversation with some people saying, hey, if you want to save your buddy's life, I need to know what drugs they took and I need to know now.
Yeah.
So those type of conversations. So I never forget that. But you're right. There's all kinds of experiences out there besides law enforcement and military, like an ER nurse. Or sometimes another person I thought really very highly of. I wasn't their instructor, but I worked with them on the job, and they had a career in climate ladders, was a middle school teacher.
Yep.
And decided to come over here. So definitely agree with that some sort of life experience definitely is a plus. And it's a mature job. It's not really an entry-level job.
No, it is not. And that's what I try to express to people who ask me. It's like, yes, there is a premium on being able to handle yourself, self-defense, detaining people, being forthright, that command presence, handling weapon systems. But I said, but 90% of your job is talking to people. I mean, in my experience, you talk to everybody from, homeless people, trying to usher them around a secure site. But you do, you talk to, not to say homeless people are criminals, but you talk to those type of individuals, criminals, but then you're also dealing with heads of state, foreign,
that's correct.
Military. Like you have to be able to talk to all of these people and express your point of view and what you're trying to accomplish to create a secure environment, because you want everyone to be safe. Not even including the more modern, as you said, the violent rhetoric, the violent protests. You have to be able to control and compose yourself in all of those environments. And again, it's a very unique job. I don't know that there's another job on the planet that could prepare you for that, but you got to have the ability to have confidence in what you're doing, but also in a way that you can kind of sell your idea of what you're trying to do to people who might not want to do it.
I'll add to that what you said. We also have to be experts in dealing with the mentally ill.
Yep.
Remember in your academy, to me, that's also one of the best training I've ever seen in my life. What the Secret Service does for our protective intelligence training, where we're dealing with mentally ill people that have a violent or unusual interest against our protectee. And you have to be able to talk to somebody, which is an entire different set of skills.
Yes, it is.
Talking to them, because they just don't relate to the way you and I see things and the way I think. So it takes a lot of patience, and it takes special skills and training to do that.
Well, let me ask you this, because you just kind of, again, I wasn't prepared to talk about this, but you brought the ER nurse, and I think it's very, very similar to how people get. You take a normal person who otherwise would not do anything violent or put themselves in a position where they had to engage with law enforcement, but politics lately has just put people outside of themselves, much like drugs or some sort of emergency situation. Like people that go to the emergency room, they're suffering from extreme pain or some sort of psychotic break or drugs or whatever. Otherwise, outside of that specific moment, they're working 9 to 5. They're not trying to hurt you. They're not talking wild and crazy to you. They're not threatening you. But I think politics has kind of brought people who otherwise would not put themselves in that position, jumping fences, attacking cops, whatever is heightened emotional state. I mean, January 6th is a good point of reference for that. You had thousands of people who were very passionate about what they believed in, engaged in somewhat criminal activity. Again, I don't get into the right and wrong of things. I don't try to dive in like this is right, this is wrong. But it's just you. Otherwise, if that moment hadn't existed, nobody would have ever engaged with you. You wouldn't have had to engage with federal law enforcement.
That is correct. Definitely And I'd say social media has played a lot of roles in that compared to what I saw in 1996 and in the 90s and early 2000. There wasn't that platform pouring gasoline on the darn fire.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me ask you this, because you obviously protected a lot of foreign leaders, and I'll reference a point just to kind of give you an example. I was dealing with the prime minister. I'm drawing a blank on the country. It was a female, and their leader was holy. I'm drawing a blank. I wish I could remember the country, but we were there. There was a bunch of people there, a couple hundred people there that were very excited. She was in their presence. They were excited to see her. I had a couple try to climb over me like I was just an inanimate obstacle, and I had to shove them back. And I had to look at her and say, they cannot do that. They cannot climb on me. They cannot grab on me. They cannot grab on you. And she was trying to control the situation. Not that they were trying to harm her in any way, but they were just, again, outside their normal reaction and how they would react to her presence. And you could kind of see that at Trump rallies or, different rallies that you've been to. People just lose all common sense, in my opinion, and would do abnormal things. Did you see that when you were?
All the time. There's something like a rock star mentality.
Oh, yeah.
President Clinton was very popular at his rallies and campaign events, and they were fans of his. They would never think of hurting him, but they would just look at him like their favorite rock star, and they just wanted to go up and shake hands with him and talk to him. So I did see people trying to rush up to him or around a barricade or a certain campaign events, and we had to politely stop them and tell them, I said, hey, you're going to hurt yourself. And
yeah.
I believe that you don't want to hurt them, but I can't automatically assume that you're not a threat. You're getting too excited. You don't want to knock somebody down and hurt them, which has happened. I think one of my first campaign assignments when I was working a big outdoor rally for the 96 campaign, I felt like a paramedic most of the day because I was running from almost one medical emergency after. I did CPR that day on somebody. We had people from a crowd getting pushed down, including a child that possibly had a broken wrist. Just sometimes that's a big part of the Secret Service problem too. Not somebody wanting to hurt the person we're protecting, but they're just too much of a fan and not paying attention to. They're not here to see you. Okay. They do like you. They're glad for your support, but you can't just run up to them and throw your arms around them. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and much like you were talking about campaigns, especially during the Trump campaign, because I was one of the first ones had some time on and I worked, but people would show up 8, 9, 10 day before, hours early in the elements. They're falling out. They're dehydrated. There's too much because the site wasn't even open yet. And they're just in the parking lot or they're stored. They're waiting somewhere often away from the site, and ambulances are having to run around. I'm like, what is going on? But that's how excited people were to get into the venue to see whoever their person was.
I saw that a lot. Obama's first inauguration. There were so many people getting there at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, trying to get on the mall to be a part of it. And they weren't dressed for the weather. We all know what is January like in Washington.
Freezing.
And some people, God bless them, just put on their best suit, their best church clothes, best going to church clothes and shoes and put on a heavy jacket and think that's going to protect you. No, it's not. So
no, it is not.
I was dealing with a lot of medical emergencies there too, hypothermia, the young and also the elderly. And this is again, just so excited, and that becomes a part of our Secret Service mission too, is not just protecting them, but protecting the public. Somebody is in respiratory distress, or they're in hypothermia or frostbite. We gotta help medical. We gotta help local law enforcement. We gotta do a humanitarian mission is very much a part of it as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that I think they try to teach it, or they at least talked about it in training. But until you're there, you've got 5, 10, 15, 60,000 people. It is hard for somebody who's never worked secured a site like that to put that. I'm like, you got to have bathrooms, you got to have water, you need to have EMS medical teams, you got to have ways for these people to get out. It's just a lot that kind of goes into it that until you're actually exposed to it, I don't know how you prep for that or simulate that.
Correct. And you have to tell the staff too, because
oh yeah,
you have to tell the staff, listen, you need to prepare for this. This is a big deal. People are going to be excited. And there are certain things you need to deal with. It's not my job, but I'm going to try to give you hints about doing your job. Water, medical facilities. Is there enough space for everybody to be here? Maybe put out some communications to the supporters that, hey, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? Put that out in the news media. This is not a time to dress in, say, a business suit or a nice church dress and put a big coat on, think you're going to be okay. No, you need to dress for the weather.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like where you're at right now. I don't think a suit and a big coat would protect you out there in Montana where you're at right now.
No, absolutely would not. It's freezing out here, but that's what I'm saying. Like, people just get it in their head, and I can only imagine trying to protect the site out here. It's like people travel from all over the country. I mean, even agents would show up with, leather-soled shoes and a heavy coat. I'm like, dude, you need to go buy some warm clothes, warm boots. Like, you need to figure this out. You're going to freeze to death standing post for 12 hours.
And that's where training and the site agent has to come into. If you know you have exterior posts, you need to reach out to those agents and their reporting instructions. You, Tyler Martin, you, Johnnie Rhodes, you're going to be working in an exterior post and you're going to be outside. This is what we highly suggest you bring, winter boots, dress in layers, gloves, hat, say all those things. Right.
Oh, yeah. And I want to be respectful of your time. We've been talking a little over an hour, but I want to hit a couple of different points just to be respectful of what we were talking about. But I just also kind of want to tie into did you ever do any foreign advances or I just kind of want to draw a picture of what it's like to put together.
I never did a foreign lead. I was scheduled for a couple of foreign advances. Well, for the vice president, I did not do any foreign advances for him. Now, I did some foreign advances for their kids, one in London and also one in Paris. I also did some foreign advances for some former Secret Service protectees. I was scheduled for a couple of foreign advances. One I was so looking forward to. This had been the trip of a lifetime. Vice President Finney was going on a trip to Australia. I was really looking forward to that. But that's when they had the avian, where's that thing? Avian flu.
Mm-hmm. They were shutting everything down.
Avian flu and the trip got canceled. Now, I did some foreign travel with him on the shift.
Yep.
So one of my last foreign trips with him, we went to the Middle East, and that was very interesting. We went to Kuwait, we went to Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan. So wasn't on advance, but I was on the traveling shift, and definitely our antennas were up, and we were concerned. So this could be a very potentially dangerous trip. We were briefed on that.
Oh yeah. And foreign advances, you deal with a lot more military personnel, the logistics of getting everybody there, hotel rooms, like that. That's that's probably a whole episode. But you did advances in the U.S., correct?
Right. I also did when it was intelligence. When I worked in the intelligence division.
Yep.
I did foreign advances for the president, and that was interesting. And one of the main things you got to remember when you do a foreign advance, your badge doesn't mean anything over it.
Correct.
Or China or something like that. In some ways, it's almost easier in a way because you can't do anything. You're with a foreign counterpart, and anything you want to do, you have to have them do it for you. You cannot go up and question somebody. You can't make decisions. You have to, hey, I would kind of hat in hand, please, I would really like it if you would do something like this for me, or you would make a security arrangement like this. It would really make us happy. You have to be very, very, going back to our communication skills, you really have to exercise diplomacy and talk to them and say, ask and politely ask and tell them why this is necessary for us.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on the domestic side, though, I'm just trying to draw a picture. Like, you have to deal with the venues, transportation, the roads, residents, staff, your post standers.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that? Just if you have one off the top of your head or just summary either way.
One of my last advances when I was on the vice president, he landed in North Carolina and he was motorcading to South Carolina to do a campaign assignment and back. That's very complicated. So we're dealing with two states. We're talking a multi-state motorcade.
Yep.
So there's a coordination. Okay, who's going to be the lead car in North Carolina? It'll be a North Carolina Highway Patrol. We cross into South Carolina, then the South Carolina Highway Patrol we have to decide, and we have to coordinate very carefully. Once we cross the state lines, the South Carolina Highway Patrol car will move up and take the lead, and the North Carolina Highway Patrol car will fall back. And that has to be talked about with very high officials, and there could be, some egos, some bruising. Also, from your own time on the vice president detail, what do we do at the end of the visit? The pictures, right?
Yep.
People get their pictures with the protectee. So that becomes very political, very ego and all that. So we have a multi-state visit. So I'm going to ask, and I have to ask the staff, hey, instead of the normal 6 clicks, I'm going to need 12 because I don't want to play favorites between each state. They've done a good job. Can we have double the amount so I can have, say, 6 for North Carolina law enforcement, 6 for South Carolina law enforcement. And that's the lead's job. That was my job as a lead. As a site agent or a TS agent, that's not going to be a problem. Now, as a TS agent, which means transportation section, that's going to be hard for you too because you're in charge of all the motorcade routes and you're having to deal with at least two different venues, 2 different law enforcement entities. And I'm not even talking about we got 2 states. We also have to worry about county police, possibly local police. So it is very much a balancing act of talking to people. Okay, who wants to participate? And I always made it a policy never to turn people away. If I needed 12 local law enforcement, it's a city or a county, they don't get many presidential visits and they really want to help and they really want to play and participate. Hey, I know, Johnny, you only asked for 12. Can I send you 18? Hey, send me 20. I don't care. I will find a job for them. I'm not turning any help away.
Correct. And that's something that we were always having to deal with because, protectees, vice president would do a trip in New York or LA or Miami. It's like, yeah, you got all the resources on the planet. And then they'd go to Maine or North Dakota. It's like, look, there's not that many cops here. We can't do the same type of level of security that you expect that, that we don't have 30,000 cops to pull from. So you're always having to work through that depending on where you are, what the climate is, what the availability is.
Right. I did a visit one time as a senior agent to Hazard, Kentucky. What a name. It's like something out of the movies.
There you go.
Never been a PPD visit, but I had plenty of police officers helping me because they had not had one. They never had a visit there for President Clinton. Every county, every city, everybody around there wanted to play. So that was one of those cases where, hey, so-and-so county, we don't need them, but they said they would love to send over 7 or 8 people or something like that. You bring them, I'll find a job for them, okay? Not an issue.
Yeah. And so just one last thing I wanted to touch on. I feel like it's important, and I try to explain to people because they see the Secret Service, they see federal law enforcement, they're traveling around. A lot of people don't stop and think about the effects that has on family and a lot of the missed birthdays and schools. And I mean, you were in the military, so you kind of have prepped for that, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
The effects on your family.
It definitely takes a strong spouse before you even accept this job. This is our life. Not only am I going to be traveling a lot, but transfers. Nowadays, you're in D.C. a lot longer. You're on the detail for 6 years, where when I started, it was 4 years on the vice president detail, 5 years on the president detail, and you're expected to leave Washington and go somewhere else. Now, 6 years on the detail, I don't see how people can do that. I don't know if I could have done that. That is 6 years. My first time in Washington, I did 6 years, but not just detail time. I wasn't going to tell, but my 2000 to 2006, I took leave one Christmas in 6 years, just one. Yep. Now, I had times where I was home on Christmas Day and had to leave the day after, or days that I worked Christmas, but I was home. I would just go in, work a shift and go home. So it is very difficult with shift work. Even when you're home, even when you're not traveling, you're doing midnights, or you're doing 2 to 10s, or you're doing this. It is a very much a harsh family separation. Especially, I think it's a lot worse now because they make you do 6 years on the detail. And maybe you're Laura, I don't see how I don't see how that works. I really don't. I don't envy people now. When I left protection and went to Atlanta, my kids were in high school. So that changed my life completely. I felt like one of the best definitions I've heard of what's it like to be phase 3 when you leave the detail and go back to the field. It's like stepping off a moving train. The train stopped and you got off and you're just standing there. You're not moving 100 miles an hour anymore. And I was able to go to all the high school events for my kids and be there for them most every day and most weekends. Where in Washington, no, that wasn't the case. I didn't have real little kids in Washington. My kids were like in a grade school, but they noticed there was Christmases I was, if not working, I was traveling. Now they're grown. My kids are now in their 30s. They do appreciate what I did for them because of one of the best things I could say about the Secret Service is the best thing I could say about any job. I was never worried about providing for my family, health care, standard of living. I gave my family everything they could possibly need and quite a few luxuries. And the Secret Service helped me put 2 kids through college, and they know that. So that's, somebody say, what was the best? Some people don't look at me kind of surprised when I say, what did you like most about the Secret Service? And I said, they took care of my family, period.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even though I traveled a lot, and I certainly did travel a lot, and so did a lot of people, I will say this, the whole time I was in the Secret Service, I don't care if you were in China or Russia or some remote island in the Pacific, if one of your kids got put in a hospital, or God forbid your spouse or say a parent died, they moved heaven and earth to get you home immediately.
Yep.
I've been in that situation, not where I had to get home quickly, but one of my people had to get home quickly. And we wasted no effort in making phone calls and calling whatever military support, whatever we needed. You don't understand. This guy's father died, or this person's kid was in the hospital. He's going to be okay, but his kid's in the hospital. Wife or husband is freaking out. We're talking hours, not days. We want this agent home. Everybody understand? We're on the same page. Let's make it happen.
Yeah. I did it. I experienced that again, not personally, but you get kind of, well, for me anyway, self-reflection. I got caught up in traveling and doing all these things. And I would always make it a point to try to reach out to my kids and my family, at least, every day, the best I could, depending on traveling. But you sit back after you're kind of done and you realize how much you miss. But like you said, I was able to provide for them in a way that I couldn't beforehand. And they are appreciative now, especially my son's in the Marine Corps. So he's starting to understand the sacrifices and, coming home after being on the road for 3 weeks and you land and you got to drive, 5, 6, 7 hours home, depending on where you are. And you're exhausted, but you want to make sure you're there for the important event. So it is a major sacrifice. I try to beat that as much as I can, because I think that gets lost in a lot of the rhetoric that gets thrown about federal law enforcement, especially Secret Service.
Yeah, absolutely.
And expectations. Well, Johnny, I appreciate your time. I've had you on for an hour 15. Is there anything you want to leave with, sir?
No, just for those of you that hear this, that are thinking about a career in federal law enforcement, hey, I did it, and I'm glad I did it. If I had to go back March 4, 1996, my first day on the job, would I do it again? 100%. Just for those of you who are listening to this and have an interest in it, it can be a very rewarding career, but you have to go in it with your eyes open. It's a calling. It's not just a job. It's like going into medicine, or if you want to be a minister or something like that, it's a calling. It could be a very rewarding career, but you really got to want this. Just like the military, you got to want this. And if you don't, you really don't belong in this. It's going to ruin you, your family, and we certainly don't want to take you in and train you and then you leave like in your first 6 or 7 months. You really have to want this. And if you do, definitely we need you out here. Definitely.
Absolutely. Well said, well summarized, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck to you. Bye.